Testing, 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 one, two, three. Testing, testing, one, two, three. Testing, testing, one, two, three. Testing, 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 one, two, three.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the City Club of Eugene's January 23rd, 2026 program, the Oregon Legislature 2026 Short Session, What's Next? My name is Thomas Hura. I serve as president of City Club, and it's my honor to welcome you to another of the many forums we've held since 1990 in the name of our mission to build community vision through open inquiry. City Club is fortunate to be a trusted, open, and independent voice for Eugene area community members to be heard. And as a lifelong Eugenian, I dare say the community is fortunate to have the City Club, but particularly to hear from our guests in the audience and their questions, whether here in the beautiful Wow Hall, online, or over the radio. Anyone who attends a City Club forum has equal access to asking questions in our space. We believe these gatherings and broadcasts around critical community topics strengthen our understanding of one another and ultimately our ability to support the community building work in so many sectors of Eugene. In today's fractured information landscape, we want to be a place where you can participate in unearthing, disseminating, and sharing relevant information in conversation together. We would love for you to browse our past programs at cityclubofeugene.org or our YouTube or Facebook. Please consider becoming a member if you'd like to support our rigorous volunteer work as Oregon's only city club that provides weekly forums. There are many ways to partner with us, and I'd like to thank our Diamond community sponsors. The University of Oregon has helped Oregonians question critically, think logically, reason effectively, communicate clearly, act creatively, and live ethically since 1876. Get more information at uoregon.edu. Lane Community College transforms lives through learning. LCC provides comprehensive, accessible, high-quality educational opportunities that promote student success. For more information, visit lanecc.edu. Thank you to the City of Eugene and to Lane County for their generous support. And recently, the Herbert J. Merker Fund of the Oregon Community Foundation was willing to provide a grant for the work we do. Their vote of confidence means a lot to our fully volunteer-led organization. A quick reminder, please silence all cell phones in the hall. And with that, I'm eager to turn the mic over to my colleague on the board and the coordinator of today's program, Eric Jura.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you. The title of today's program is the Oregon Legislature 2026 Short Session, What's Next? The Oregon Legislative 2026 Short Session is scheduled to begin on Monday, February 2nd, which is a week from Monday. I can't believe it. Runs for a maximum of 35 days and is typically limited to high priority items. And I can tell you, I think that although it's called a short session, it's not going to be short on consequential issues and perhaps even a little bit of drama as well. Today, we have with us to answer questions about what's going to be happening and I'm very pleased to be here with them, is Representative Julie Fahey from District 14, which is West Eugene and Veneta, and also the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Also, Senator Floyd Przansky, a Democrat from District 4, which is Springfield to Eugene, who has served in the Oregon Legislature since 1995, which by my math means over 30 years. So, third person that's on the stage here with us today is the City Club is leveraging its partnership with NPR member station KLCC. We've been working with the KLCC for many, many years. Our questioner is KLCC reporter Rebecca Hanson-White. Quick note about the conduct of the program, and then I'll get out of the way. For roughly the first half, Rebecca will ask a set of questions that have been prepared for the event. After this, we'll take a 5-minute break, and then we'll resume, and we will take questions from the audience. We're doing things a little bit differently today for those of you that have been here recently. Scattered throughout the hall are blank cards and pens for you to write questions to be asked of the speaker and senator. Two other members of City Club and myself will be roving around to pick up the questions and organize them. We'll select from those questions to be asked of our guests during the second half of the program. And Rebecca will be asking those questions as well. So without further ado, I'll turn the program over to Rebecca.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and also thank you to our guests, Speaker Fahey, and Senator Przanski. Just to start out, we'll just get going. 35 days is not a lot of time to get what I think that both of you are hoping to get a lot done. We'll start with Speaker Fahey. What is your top priorities this short session?
Thank you so much. And thanks for having us here today. Happy to talk a little bit about the short legislative session. And you're right, it is short. And unfortunately, the session is happening in the backdrop of some very challenging things going on with our federal government. Decisions on tariffs or healthcare subsidies that are driving up the cost of groceries and healthcare, chaotic decisions around the National Guard deployment and ICE immigration raids that are causing fear and anxiety in our communities. And then just the loss of federal funding that we're going to see over the next few years for important programs like Medicaid and SNAP. So that is a very challenging environment for us. And our job is to govern responsibly and to respond to all of those challenges in a responsible way. It's a really important moment, and it's really critical that we get it right and we stay focused on the things that voters sent us there to do. I know you asked for one priority, and I will answer that, but we really have three bodies of work this session. One is the governing responsibilities that we need to do to govern the state, and that primarily includes balancing our budget, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more around later. We also have to stay focused on affordability because that is the number one things that voters want us to address as elected officials is the cost of living. And then finally, responding to all of the chaos that we're seeing out of the federal government. We have a response agenda where we're fighting back against some of the overreach that we're seeing at the federal level. So for me, as Speaker of those three things, my constitutional responsibility is to balance the budget. And we have to do that in a responsible and balanced way with looking at some efficiency cuts, potential revenue options, and then judicious use of our reserves.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Rebecca. So from the Senate side, I just want to emphasize 35 days is not a lot of time. In fact, the way the bills will be assigned to the committees, we will have approximately 10 days from the time they're assigned to our committee to actually have them voted out of our committee so they can actually make it through the process, because you keep in mind, whatever starts on the Senate has to go to the House if it passes the Senate and start its journey through the House, just like anything from the House, for the most part, has to come to the Senate. So we're going to be on very limited time. I agree with the Speaker. The budget area is very, very concerning. Not many of our legislators have gone through what I call a budget-cutting session, but clearly we're going to need to be doing some really thoughtful thinking and how do we lessen the impact that we can based on what's happened at the federal level, H.R. 1, as the Speaker will go in much more detail on the budget stuff, of how it really is going to be impacting us, and already is impacting us. And we have to be planning for the future because our state requires us to have a balanced budget every 2 years. And so we can't go down to the bottom of the basement, or the concourse it's now called, and have a printing machine to print money. The other two areas I think are a concern and issue is one is the transportation package. I do believe that we need to take it up and we need to advance that vote from November to May. And the reason for that is because there's a lot of uncertainties here as to where we are going to go and how we're going to provide for the transportation system in this state. The other is with the pushback, the overreach of our federal government. Being the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, we will be taking up issues to deal with some of the issues that we've seen play out in our own living rooms on the TVs here in Portland as well as in Minneapolis. And I think it's very important that we hold all law enforcement accountable, and specifically in the area of the federal agents that are now coming into our state and acting without unchecked balance. And there's a way for us to do that.
And I did want to start out talking about some of the federal policy immigration-related bills. There's already been quite a few released by Oregon lawmakers that they'd like to take up, ranging from private right of action to allowing the state to withhold payments from the federal government. What types of bills do both of you see gaining traction this legislative session?
I'll just start off. I think the key one I find that will be most impactful will be what's being called Converse Section 1983 Civil Rights Action. Converse, in the sense of right now, the way that act works is that local, state officers can be held accountable in federal court for a violation of the federal civil rights of an individual. Unfortunately, federal agents are not covered under a current 1983 civil action. And that was brought in under a case called Bevins, is how we reached the point where local and state law enforcement people can be held accountable for violation of civil rights. So what we will be bringing forward will be a contrary to that as to the federal government and their agents, and that individuals would have that private right of action to be able to go into federal court as they can today to go after they think as someone that's violated their civil rights, that is a local or state officer, but instead it would be applied equally and to the federal officers that are operating within the state.
So it's great to be up here with an attorney. I am not an attorney. And the reason that is that it's great to be up here with Senator Brzezinski is that these are very complex legal issues when we're talking about states' authority to regulate federal action. So we have been working since the long session adjourned last June, we have been working with legislators, partnering with Democratic lawmakers in other states to try and figure out what are the ways that we can address some of these overreach challenges that we're seeing, the abuses and atrocities of ICE, masked federal law enforcement, and the federal government illegally withholding funds. And so these are all very tricky legal areas, and I'm feeling very proud of the package of bills that we have put forward to take up this session. We are trying to act in a way that actually protects people on the ground and is most likely to survive a legal challenge in the courts if it comes to that. So I'll highlight a handful of things. Floyd mentioned one approach to holding federal law enforcement officers accountable in the courts. We are also going to have a measure about visibility and mass law enforcement. I'm very proud of this particular piece of legislation. There's been a lot of conversation in other states about states withholding funding from the federal government if they withhold funding from us. That is like I said, that is a very tricky legal area, but I think Oregon is putting forward legislation that will provide some important guardrails if the federal government withholds federal funding from us, if we challenge that in court, if the court finds that withholding was illegal, and the federal government refuses to pay anyway, then the state of Oregon can withhold funding from the feds. I think that is a very narrowly tailored technical bill that will provide an important guardrail, and it's one that I hope we never have to use. And it's one that 2 years ago we would never be having this conversation. But the things that we are seeing out of the federal government right now, they're causing chaos for our Oregonians all around the state, and they're putting extra burdens and chaos on state government itself as we try to fulfill our duties. We cannot do our work if we are not sure what kinds of resources are coming from the federal government. So that, in addition to holding law enforcement accountable, notification requirements for schools when ICE is on campus, other things about protecting our federal lands and our environment, trying to, get these renewable projects that are in the works on solar and wind done faster so they can qualify for the federal tax credits that are going away. There is a huge body of work that we need to take up this session just to respond to everything that's coming at us from out of the federal government.
And I did have a question about, right now, I think lawmakers are preparing to deal with the fallout of the big, beautiful bill, and that has caused a deficit here in Oregon in our state government. What is the approach, we'll start with Speaker Fahey, you have for addressing that deficit?
Yeah, so I mentioned in the opening that addressing our budget challenges is the number one thing that we need to do this session. And so just to give a little context, last year during our legislative session, Oregon budgets in 2-year cycles. So in the odd numbered years, that's when we set our 2-year budget. And we knew that there would be changes coming out of the federal government. We knew that Congress was debating what ultimately became, the big ugly bill, H.R. 1. And so we figured that there would be potential cuts in funding. We figured that there would be big tax giveaways to corporations and the wealthy, and that would flow through and impact our budget. And so we budgeted very conservatively last year. We didn't really expand, create new programs. We tried to make cuts for efficiency in state government, and we left a big surplus at the end of our budget process. When we adjourned at the end of June, just a few days later, H.R. 1, the big ugly bill, was signed into law. And overnight, that completely ate up that surplus and blew a pretty significant hole in our budget, because Oregon connects our tax code to the federal tax code. So all those tax giveaways to wealthy people and big corporations, that flowed through to Oregon's tax code. And the federal government can afford to give away those resources because they don't have to balance their budget. They can run a deficit. But states have to balance our budget. So when those decisions in Congress get made to give away all those tax resources, that impacts our Oregon budget too. So overnight, even before we talk about the cuts to federal funding, that our resources in our budget was out of balance. And then you look ahead, we are going to lose $15 billion in federal funding over the next 5 or 6 years to programs like Medicaid and SNAP. And there is no state budget that is set up to absorb those costs. We just cannot do it. And so this is a very challenging time for us to set a budget and be able to protect those core services like healthcare and public schools and public safety. So that is our job this session. We have both a short-term and a long-term problem. The short-term problem is to balance our budget this year. We are going to get through this, and we're going to do it responsibly. We are looking at a set of targeted cuts to make sure that all of our state agencies are operating efficiently. And we're going to look at disconnecting from some of those tax giveaways for corporations and the wealthy that happened in that big ugly bill. And then we're going to look at judicious use of our reserves as well. So I think tackling this problem in the short term requires a balanced approach to balancing our budget. And the most important thing to me is that we focus on protecting those core services that Oregonians rely on, so we can keep making sure our schools are educating our kids and folks have access to health care, rural hospitals stay open. So that's my focus on the budget side this year.
And if you, Senator Przanski, do you want to have perspective on the budget? Okay. Okay. All right. I think the other big priority that is really in the news right now is the transportation package. Governor Tina Kotek previously said she supported a redirect, repeal, and rebuild approach, but it now looks like that may not be legal. What option, Speaker Fahey and Senator Przanski, if you would like to, do you see as a path forward, and what would you support?
Well, I think there are 3 decision points that the legislature needs to focus on in the upcoming short session. So how do we balance the budgets in the near term from a transportation perspective? How do we get certainty on the funding from the package that we passed sooner? And then how do we set ourselves up for a successful longer-term conversation? So just to back up for a minute, we have been working for many months, if not years, to try and address a challenge in our transportation system, which is this. We have been seeing increased fuel efficiency in vehicles, greater adoption of electric vehicles over the last decade. That is great for our climate goals. We love it. We love an electric vehicle. But one of the challenges it creates is that when we have a transportation system that relies on the gas tax to fund basic operations and maintenance, those revenues are no longer keeping up with our needs. And so we've been talking for a long time about how do we fix that? How do we overhaul our transportation funding system so that we can keep the roads plowed and the lanes striped and the potholes filled? And so last year, we put forward a comprehensive package that would do just that. It ran into challenges in the legislature, particularly in the Senate. And so then we came back in a special session in the fall to pass a scaled down version of that transportation package to fund the short-term needs to keep everybody safe this winter and the next. Unfortunately, a group of Republican lawmakers collected signatures to refer that measure to the ballot. And so that means that the short-term funding has been put on hold. And that funding not only goes to the state and the Oregon Department of Transportation, but also flows through to cities and counties who really rely on it to be able to fund our local streets. So that funding has been put on hold, and that means that this session, we are going to need to find funding to balance ODOT's budget, because the budget was relying on that funding, so that we can plow those state roads and do some basic operations and maintenance of our culverts and bridges. We are working on that, and we'll have a plan that we'll present in the beginning of the short session. We also need to have more certainty about that funding that has been referred to the people. And so I support setting the election date at May, so that we can know sooner in the biennium whether or not that funding will materialize. Every time there has been, in the last 25 years, every time there has been a tax measure that has been referred to the ballot, the election date has been set sooner than November, so that the legislature can have certainty. That was true, if folks remember, back in 2018 with Measure 101 about the healthcare taxes. It was true in the Great Recession with Measure 66 and 67. Having that certainty about whether those resources are available sooner is really, really important. And then importantly, we've got to pick this conversation back up and try and do that overhaul for the long term about what is our transportation funding system going to look like in 10 or 20 years as opposed to the next 2 years.
Yeah, and I agree with where the speaker has spoken as to exactly why we need to be moving the date to May instead of waiting until November. I mean, the reality, we have a duty and obligation to take care of the streets and transportation systems in this state. We need to know exactly what we will or won't be having coming in, because by having the vote in May, we will hear from all of us as Oregonians as to what our priorities are, whether they want that transportation package to go forward or not. With that said, I think it's also important to understand how this will in fact impact without having the funding in the rural areas of the state. We have regional transportation systems that are set up to help individuals who live in rural areas to get to more areas of metro where they can have health care taken care of and hit other type of important appointments that they have to do to live. And one of the things I'm really concerned with is that if we don't act on this sooner than later, we're going to displace many rural residents in this state, and they are not going to be able to get the services they need to actually continue to live where they're at, where they want to live, and not be and will be able to actually continue to live their quality of life that they want and have. I do want to just point out that the last major transportation package we had was in 2017. And that was one that when it was being built, it was known to the people who worked on that committee that we were not fulfilling some of the needs for maintenance in this state. And it was always understood that we would need to come back. Well, let's just fast forward from 2017 into COVID, a lot of disarray that occurred there. And so this was a package that was being put together to actually help address some of the ongoing considerations. And that's why it has so much influence on the local. If I remember correctly, approximately 50% of the revenue that will be coming in will actually come to local areas, I mean the counties and the cities. And that's why we want to have this question answered sooner than later.
I did want to talk about healthcare. Healthcare has been a challenge locally in our community with corporate consolidation and the loss of our emergency room in Eugene. But we've also had Medicaid impacts with the loss of Pacific Source in Lane County in both of your districts. And coming down the pipe, we're going to see more Medicaid impacts. Is there anything this legislative session that either of you are focused on that might address some of the healthcare challenges that people in your district are experiencing?
You're absolutely right. Our healthcare system has been in or near crisis for a few years now, particularly in Lane County. We are sort of the epicenter of what we're seeing all around the state. A little bit of the canary in the coal mine with private, outside large corporation coming in and buying Oregon Medical Group, the emergency room closure. Access to care has been a real challenge in Lane County, including for me personally. I lost both my PCP and my OBGYN at Oregon Medical Group. So it's been a real challenge for many people around the county. And to your point about the transition from Pacific Source to Trillium, I just want folks to know almost 100,000 people in Lane County get their health care through the Oregon Health Plan. And so that is our Medicaid program here in Oregon. And so starting at the beginning of next month, many of those folks will transition from Pacific Source to Trillium. It's unprecedented. That number of people have never been transitioned from one CCO to another in the history of our CCO model. And so it's a really big change. We've been focused on making sure folks have clear and accurate information about that change and that we're protecting continuity of care in that transition. In terms of this session for healthcare, one of the things that we're focused on is making sure that we are required to implement some of the administrative changes that have come down from the federal government to the Medicaid program and to the SNAP program from the Big Ugly Bill. And so I talked earlier about the impact on our revenue system of the Big Ugly Bill. I talked about the cuts in federal funding that are coming. What I didn't talk about is that there are new administrative requirements that the federal government is putting on the states, that states are going to have to pay for. And that includes things like more frequent eligibility checks for folks who are on these programs. It includes work requirements and other things that the state is going to need to manage. Those changes will cost us money to implement. They are an unfunded mandate from the federal government. It's going to cost us more to administer these programs, and we are getting less resources from the federal government to be able to do it. So this session, where we have to make sure that our agencies have the resources to implement those changes, and we are starting the work to prepare for what does the future of the Medicaid program in this state look like, because these big losses to federal funding are coming.
So I want to just follow up as to some stuff more, I guess, on a local level. I want to give a call out to Representative Nancy Nathanson. Nancy and I have been working on, and she's taken the lead, I'm there to help and support, the making certain that individuals in our community that you need emergency, immediate assistance, I say not emergency, but being able to know where you can go get that service. Many of us think that these urgent care facilities, you can just go in and get whatever you need. That's not the case. They have really awkward hours for many people to be able to access, and then they have a lot of limitations as to what they do or what they can provide. So one of the things we do want to make certain, since we've lost the only hospital we had in Eugene, is to make certain that if someone needs to go to get medical attention, that if they go to a facility, they know what's available there. Urgent care facilities right now do not have any regulations under state law. And so Nancy and I believe that this is imperative statewide that we actually have that type of regulation, so we know exactly, and our constituents know exactly what they can expect and anticipate when they're seeking out that type of service. And again, I think this is one of those areas that we need to work together at the state to make certain we have the healthcare system set up throughout the state. And we're not the only one having these type of issues, and I think this is another important area to be concentrated on in our short session.
And so that was our last question for me. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and then I think we'll go to our audience questions.
For airing City Club programs on Mondays at 7 p.m. In the metro area of Lane County, they broadcast on 89.7 FM and in Florence on 88.1 FM. For those listening at home or in your commute right now, your household is one of several thousand tuning into City Club on KLCC, and we're truly honored to have you. You can also find all recent City Club programs archived at klcc.org, as well as on our YouTube channel and the City Club of Eugene podcast. We'll take our short break, and we're looking forward to questions.
from our 5-minute break. Can we have people return to their seats, please? All right. Don't make me gavel you. All right. All right. We're now on to audience questions. We have quite a few, so the three of us are gonna get through as many as we can in the time that we have. Our first one from the audience is, if Oregon Medical Group / Optum cannot come up with an agreement with Trillium, will the legislature get involved, as OMG has a large Medicaid population?
So what that question is addressing is that as part of the transition from Pacific Source to Trillium, Trillium needs to contract with local providers. Their provider network was not as extensive as Pacific Source's was. And so, when this transition was very first announced, I met with the Trillium folks and I talked about the importance of making sure that we had continuity of care, and OMG is part of that, as was making sure both hospitals, McKinsey-Willamette and Peace Health, were under contract there. So it's a really important issue, and it's not likely one that we'll get involved with the legislature this session. It's more through the Oregon Health Authority, and through Senator Brzezinski and I and other local legislators exerting our positions to try and hold Trillium accountable for keeping that continuity of care. There are rules from the Oregon Health Authority about how to ensure continuity of care, that people that are in the middle of care can keep that care through that transition. And so we are watching very closely and making sure those rules are adhered to.
All right, now I just want to say, just going to call it a call out to the Oregon Medical Group. Their facility that's on Country Club Road, if you need urgent care, that's where I would suggest that you consider going, because they have a full-fledged ability and docs on site there. And this is one of the areas where we're trying to take some of the load off of the two hospitals on the ER side. And so if you do find yourself in that scenario, you should. And I would agree that this is really at this point an administrative issue that we need to allow for the agencies to work through. And if in the future that hasn't been worked, then we'll look at us engaging. But we are, quote unquote, behind the scenes working to make certain that transition is as smooth as it can be, but it's going to be daunting.
And our next question, has there been interest in eliminating the kicker? Would that be a revenue source for the state?
Okay, whoever gave me the softball question, thank you very much. So let me just tell you, each of us have two bills that we can introduce in the short session. One of the two bills that I am introducing moving forward is dealing with the kicker. What I'm asking is that we refer to the voters, because it is in the Constitution, so we, the voters, have to make the decision, is to look at how we have the formula now. I would have a recommendation that we say, for the first $300 million in a kicker, it goes back 100% to the taxpayers. Anything above the $300 million, we take and we divide 50% to the taxpayers. The other 50% would go into two silos, one for education, K-12 and community colleges, to be supplemental and enhanced funding, not from the general fund, but enhanced for special needs. And then the other area that I think we as a state have to really come to grips with is wildfire suppression and prevention. And so that is the two silos of money where it would go, and then we, the legislature, could direct that money in addition to whatever's coming from the general fund into those two areas. And that would be a vote of the people. That would have to be, it would be scheduled if we go forward with it November of this year.
And I'll just add quickly, I think, Senator Brzezinski is bringing this bill this session. I just want to underscore that because the kicker is in the Constitution, almost every wholesale change that you might think of making to the kicker needs to be approved by the people, by a vote of the people. And the kicker remains quite popular with voters. And so that, from a legislative perspective, we're trying to strike that balance, that if there are big changes, they need to be voted on, in terms of how it works, they need to be voted on by the people. I think it's fair to ask, at some point, to ask the people of Oregon, would you want kicker resources to be devoted to wildfire prevention and fighting wildfires? That isn't a change that the legislature can just make wholesale.
I've read that Lane County Waste Management Division is losing millions as haulers skip the Eugene landfill for Medford instead. What can the legislature do about this?
Sit and watch. Yeah. I mean, the reality, we're talking contracts as to between entities, public and private. There is a ongoing trash war that's happening right now in our county, and the reality is we can't force the private providers to use the facility here at Short Mountain. And clearly, from what I'm seeing and reading, is that we have a situation where there is a pressure of financial needs, and the county has anticipated these fees would be coming in to pay for some of the transitions that they're trying to do at the facility. But at this point, I don't see how we as state government come in and interject ourselves.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think this is more, this is a really, really important issue, and I think the Clean Lane project could help extend the life of the Short Mountain landfill and, you know, help us be more responsible with our waste. But this really is more of a county issue, and I would argue, you know, the people of Lane County as well. There's been some good coverage on this in the local media, Eugene Weekly and others. We all have the power to vote with our dollars and pick a trash hauler that, you know, might not be sending their trash to Jackson County.
All right. For our next question, can the state require ICE not to wear masks?
Short answer, no. We do not have the ability, well, let's put it this way. The short answer is still no. Here, the reality is we're talking about the supremacy clause of the Constitution as to the federal laws over superseding whatever we will do at the state level. I do believe there are some areas that we can actually have adjustments, and right now, and this is something I want to do a call out for our law enforcement in Oregon. They already have a duty to identify themselves in crowd control with appropriate measures of having a badge or some type of emblem on their uniform telling you what agency they are, and then either a name of that officer or an ID that's specifically assigned to that officer. So we're doing it here in Oregon. We are doing it here. What's the problem is the feds are coming in and they're just running amok. And so our state law would not have the control over that. And this is the part that I mentioned as to this Converse 1983 action as civil rights, where if we go forward and the courts agree that this is a means to hold federal officers accountable, we will be able to get redress that way. Now, I will tell you one of the things I feel that would be appropriate is that if you're having officers that are masked up, and there's many reasons why even Oregon officers might be, because of the weather, could be health. There's some of the investigation stuff they're doing, let's say a deceased body that's been there for 2 weeks. I mean, there's reasons why it's appropriate. They are doing their best not to do it except in circumstances that call for it. But one of the things I think we should do is require the mask itself to have identification on it. So basically, when you're there across from there, you can see who that agency is and what that number is or that name of that person. And to me, this is one of those things that we can have a little more accountability for all officers, and I believe that the courts would find that that would be something that under the 10th Amendment that we have the right as a state to set for public health and safety.
For our next question, will there be any cuts this session that will affect public schools?
We are going to fight as hard as possible to protect our public schools. Obviously there are schools struggling around the states and districts struggling around the states. We've seen layoffs, mid-year layoffs in Springfield, which is completely unprecedented. Eugene 4J is grappling with their own budget issues. So we are going to fight as hard as possible to protect our public schools and funding for public schools for a variety of reasons, but in part because we have made so much progress on school funding in the last decade in the state of Oregon. Last session, we passed a bill that looked at how we calculate current service level. That's a very wonky thing to say, but how we set our budgets is what informed by what is the amount of resources that it would take to maintain the current level of service that we provide at our public schools. And so we increased the amount of funding that we were giving to public schools because we have a more accurate way of calculating that number. And we also set a record budget for our K-12 schools last year in our long legislative session. In fact, since the quality education model was created, we have only one time funded to the quality education model, the model of what we think is sufficient to provide a quality education for our students in this state. That one time was last year. I am very proud that we were able to accomplish that in the legislative session last year, and we have to protect that progress.
All right, I believe this next question might relate to automatic license plate readers. What options are there to establish guardrails to safeguard individual Oregonians' right to privacy from federal and state agency tools such as mass surveillance systems, either wholly operated by government agencies or by third-party vendors on their behalf?
All right, I'm not sure about the third-party vendors on their behalf. So for those who are not familiar, automatic license plate readers is a tool that law enforcement is using to help solve crimes. I will just start with the specific one here in Eugene. The Asian American Pacific Islanders had a town hall probably about a month or so back, and we had the chief of police for Eugene actually explain as to what became known as this Skyline 7. These were individuals that were going into Asian American families' homes, burglarizing, ripping up the walls to try to find valuables, and they were able to get a side panel of a vehicle that then they started doing hardcore law enforcement work on the beat, and they were able to identify where that vehicle could be located in a neighborhood. They then identified a specific location, and they were able to actually apprehend these individuals. I won't go through the whole story about what happened as to how this happened, but it was because of that hit on the automatic license plate reader that they were able to then do additional police work. So you're correct. What I feel we need to do, and I'll give you my disclaimer as a prosecutor for over 38 years now, is that we need to make certain the safeguards are there. So we need to make certain it's uniformed around the state as to how these systems work, what can and who can have access to them. We're going to require that everything to be encrypted, and then the vendors who actually provide the services, they do not have the ability to go in and see what is in that data. The key to unlock that stays with the agency that has gone under contract. And then the other part is retention. How long do we allow for that data to be sitting there, even though it's encrypted? But the point that we have to ensure is that this is not CSI TV, and 38 minutes out of an hour show, you solve the crime. In many situations, we don't get the hits to go after leads until sometime after the crime has been committed. So we have to find that balance. And that I have a work group right now that's working through this. We've gotten some police press coverage on it. You'll see more as we get into the session. But my hope is that we will, in fact, be able to find that balance, because it's a tool that I feel needs to be there, but it truly needs to be regulated, and we need to have uniformity across the state so all agencies are working under the same guidelines, and we don't have hodgepodge throughout the state.
So this, so
Can we
Senator
let-
Brzezinski is bringing a bill about that topic of license plate readers this fall. I want to talk, or this session, I want to talk about the importance of data privacy writ large in this moment we are living in right now. When I look at the history of the legislation we passed in Oregon over the last decade or so, we really like data collection. It's very important for us, and it has been historically, to be able to see, are the programs that we have passed working effectively? Are they serving the populations we want them to serve? Are we reaching all corners of the state? And so we collect a lot of data as a state. Unfortunately, what we are seeing right now from the federal government is weaponization of that data. Weaponization with ICE and with pursuing, in other places we're seeing weaponization, access to gender affirming care and reproductive health care. So last year, during the legislative session, we were starting to get an inkling of what that might look like. And so we passed out of the House and passed by the Senate too, a bill that would ban the sale of precise geolocation data. That is, down to the foot. Where has your phone been? Has it been to a reproductive health care clinic, for example? So we banned the sale of that data and put additional privacy protections in place for minors. This session, there's going to be 3 proposals around data privacy. One is the work that Senator Przansky is doing on those automatic license plate readers. There are 2 other bills that I would point to. One is about further protection of data that's sold through data brokers. And then the third is about direction to state agencies about what they do with Oregonians' data. It is very concerning how we are seeing the federal government weaponize data, and we are working to respond real time to some of the challenges that we are seeing.
All right. Our next question is, home delivery is a growing trend. How will providers such as Amazon, UPS, the post office, and other operators pay their fair share of road maintenance costs when they have heavy or light vehicles, electric or gas powered?
What a great question. That is such a good question, and it is one that we wrestled with last year, because you've seen in other states that have, Oregon isn't the only state that's wrestling with this question of how do we fund our transportation system in the future. Every state is facing the trend of, gas tax revenue not keeping up with operations and maintenance. So there are a couple of other states, Colorado and Minnesota, that passed legislation that put on delivery fees for those large delivery providers. So that was something that we looked at in Oregon. Is this a way that we can make sure that these large delivery companies are paying their fair share? Unfortunately, because Oregon doesn't have a sales tax, the collection of that was very complicated. It would have been almost impossible to implement. So there's other ways that we have looked at trying to make sure those folks are paying their fair share, but that kind of delivery fee model doesn't work because we don't have a sales tax. And so we don't have the system set up to collect it. But there are other more creative ways that we are looking at.
All right. A transportation package, sorry, I misread that question. All right. What is the path forward for Democrats and Republicans? Sorry, I'm trying to read your question. I apologize. How can they set aside their differences and bridge the divide for this transportation package?
I'd like to take it broader than just the transportation package. One of the things that we have not been able to do in the legislature because of the remodels and stuff that's been going on is actually get people together and actually have communication. We now will have a lounge that the members will be sharing instead of having a separate locations where they would be eating, and we have not had a lot of food service available for us because of the construction that's been done at the Capitol over the last 5 years. But I hope that we will start seeing something I saw when I first came in. My first 7 years in the legislature was in the minority, but I was valued by the majority for the ideas and stuff I brought forward, and we had the ability to actually have communication with each other. And I think that goes to any discipline that we're talking about, whether it's transportation or human service issues, that we are there to be able to work together and actually have these frank discussions.
So I think it is my responsibility as Speaker of the House. I am responsible for all 60 members. I don't just represent the Democrats. And what I have said since the very beginning of my speakership is that if there are Republicans that want to be governing partners in this state, there is a seat at the table for them. I have tried to do everything I can to make sure that we are addressing the big issues of this state in a bipartisan way, whether that's housing production or the future of water in this state or transportation. We have set the table so that if there are folks that want to be governing partners and make sure the Republican ideas are incorporated in the solutions we put forward, that seat is available to them. But they have to choose to sit in it. And on some issues in the legislature, we've seen amazing bipartisan cooperation. I would particularly point to the area of housing production. That was my area of focus before I became Speaker. I was the Housing Policy Chair, and I really enjoyed working with my Republican colleagues on how do we build more housing in this state to solve our housing crisis. On the area of transportation, we set the table. There was a seat at the table. We had many bipartisan conversations, and at the end of the day, particularly in the House, the Republicans said there is no transportation package that we would support that provides increased funding. And so that is a significant challenge when folks are not willing to sit at that table. But it is my commitment that we will govern in a bipartisan way if both sides are willing to put politics aside.
All right. Our next question, is the state of Oregon considering the possibility of a sales tax to address the deficit, even a temporary sales tax?
I'm going to adopt the Senator Brzezinski technique and say, short answer, no. We are not going to pass a sales tax in a 35-day legislative session. And, in part, the voters do not support that. And so look at what we saw with the transportation package. We passed a very modest increase in gas tax and registration fees, and that was referred to the ballot. The people will have their say, and we'll see whether they support that or not. But if we pass the sales tax, it would almost certainly be referred to the people, and sales taxes are not popular with the people of Oregon.
Well, we've seen in the history of Oregon how many times a sales tax has been considered and even offered and actually voted down. I believe over 10 times.
When our state representatives are doing the right thing, when our federal representatives are doing the right thing, but we feel like our national leadership is doing the wrong thing, what can we as individual citizens do that might actually make a difference?
Well, first of all, I think you need to be reaching out not only to your Congress person. I'm assuming that for most of us it's Val Hoyle, as well as our 2 U.S. senators. But I think more importantly, you have friends, you have family throughout the state. Reach out to them, have communication with them, because many people throughout the state are very concerned with what we're seeing happening at the federal level right now. And ask them to do the same thing I just said. Have them check in with their U.S. congressperson. Have them check in with the U.S. senators and give their perspective, because this is one of these things that we have to stand together, united, to overcome this unlawful, from my perspective, attack on our individual rights and our state rights.
It's such a good question. It's a very challenging time. It's a challenging time for us to be governing the state. And I have so appreciated the notes that I have gotten from folks about, thank you for fighting for us. Thank you for standing up in this time. Just the acknowledgement that, we as leaders in the state do not support what is coming out of the federal government. And so I think first step one is paying attention and making sure, knowing who your local reps are, knowing who your state reps are, and knowing who your federal delegation is, and communicating to them whether you support or oppose something. I really like Senator Brzezinski's suggestion of bringing in your friends and family and encouraging them to do the same. It's such a tough time, and what gives me hope is when I see folks stand up and speak out. When the National Guard was being threatened to be deployed in Portland last year, I could not have been prouder of how our state responded. Could not have been prouder. Our Attorney General was ready to file suit in court almost immediately against the deployment and ultimately won. But even more hopeful for me was seeing the community organizing that happened in Portland. Elected leaders, business leaders, community leaders standing up and speaking out about it and organizing protesters to say, yeah, we're going to say that we don't support this, but we're going to do it peacefully and creatively and with this sort of defiant joy of the Frog Brigade and other things, and the emergency naked bike ride. So I think it is so important that we continue to do that, acknowledge when your elected leaders are doing the right thing and stand up and speak out when they are not.
Let me just follow up with one other thing, and the speaker, Julie, just brought it up, is Dan Rayfield. He is our Attorney General, and I'm going to tell you, he's the best person we have right in that position right now. He has brought, with other Attorney Generals around this country, over 50 lawsuits against the federal administration. And we are winning. We are winning in court. We're limiting as to some of the stuff, how broad, what the feds have done. And so that's another one of those type of call-outs that you do have people in this state that are doing everything we can legally to address these issues.
All right. Our next question is, should the state pay for homeless shelters?
Yeah, so we are Homelessness over the last 5 to 6 years has been one of the top concerns of Oregonians. It has been a substantial challenge in this state. I guess I'll try not to do the 10-minute answer on housing and homelessness since it's my favorite policy area to talk about. In the long run, the way we solve our homelessness crisis is to build more housing and ensure that there are enough homes for every Oregonian. That's going to take some time. We are working very hard on that, removing barriers to building housing. But it's a long-term solution. In the short term, we have to make sure that folks have shelter and that there is a path out of homelessness for folks who are experiencing homelessness. And so this past year in the legislative session, we passed a bill in the legislature that created in statute a statewide homeless shelter network with defined criteria about what does it mean to be eligible for state funding for shelters. What are the conditions and criteria? What does that shelter have to look like? And so we provided state funding for those shelters, and also what are the criteria that shelters need to make to be eligible for that funding. I also, shelter is not a solution unto itself. It is part of the ladder of getting someone on the path out of homelessness. Folks need to be stabilized, and then they need to be connected to services to be able to exit homelessness. And I'm very proud of the work that is being done in our community. Super creative solutions from Square One Villages to Everyone Village in my neighborhood that is providing those rungs on the ladder out of homelessness. It isn't just shelter or housing. There are these community villages and other intermediate steps that we can create and that are a model for communities in other parts of the state. There's going to be a legislative delegation coming to visit Everyone Village in West Eugene in a few weeks, and I'm just very proud of the work that has been done. Hopefully we can spread it statewide.
And I would just say that we have been, in fact, investing in those type of programs around the state, and we have here, let's say, a lifeline. Dan Bryant is here today at Square One Village, and actually he's opened up, I think, the doors for a lot of us to understand and appreciate why it's so important, as the speaker says, to have these different rungs of helping someone, one, stabilize, second, how do you get them to move forward up the ladder to get to the point of where they have stability in their own housing.
In a month and a half, the 3-month eligibility checks for SNAP will kick in, kicking thousands of people off SNAP and hurting our local grocers. What can we do to stop these administrative mandates?
I think that the challenge is at the state level, we have to follow the federal requirements so that otherwise we won't be eligible for that federal funding. And we rely on the federal funding for SNAP. But the questioner is absolutely right. The point of the additional administrative burdens that the federal government, that Republicans in Congress have put on this program is to make it harder for people to access these benefits. That is the point. And so as a state, we are required to implement those requirements, but we also can make sure people understand how to follow them and make sure that we are doing the right kind of outreach so that people can respond when they need to do eligibility checks or meet those work requirements. It's really hard. This means that families around the state will go hungry, but we are going to do everything in our power to make sure that we protect those benefits and that we can keep food on the table.
And this is our last question for this event. What do you plan to do this session to address wildfires?
I serve on the Natural Resource and Wildfire Committee in the Senate. Jeff Golden is the chair. I have not seen what he is bringing forward at this point to continue the work that we've been doing as a committee. I've already mentioned the one thing as to how we might be able to have additional revenue coming in if the voters agree to silo some of the kicker money when it's above and beyond that threshold, whatever that number would be. And I know that they're looking at trying to do some more in trying to help with some of the interface areas of where the wildfires are really concerning as to impact on individuals and their houses.
I will just say briefly, because I know we're short on time, we had a very mild wildfire season last year. We were very lucky. Conditions this year are not looking great. It's quite dry. The snowpack is low. And so we have funding set aside for wildfire this summer, and we're hoping that it is not, that we have a repeat of last year. But, hope is not a plan. And so last year in the legislative session, we created a dedicated source of funding from a new revenue source for wildfire prevention and mitigation. This is the work to harden people's homes in high-risk fire areas, to do controlled burns and other, forest management techniques, so that when we do have fires, they are less severe and they're less likely to result in loss of homes and loss of life. That dedicated funding was one of the big accomplishments of last session, and we're already starting to see, the impacts of some of that work that we've done over the last few years.
Thank you. This is City Club President Thomas Hura again. And I also want to add a closing note. I believe it's necessary to add that the City Club invited legislators from the Republican Party as well to include their voices equally, and they did not accept our invitation. That's all the time we have for today. Please join me in thanking Rebecca Hanson-White, Oregon House Speaker Julie Fahey, and Oregon Senator Floyd Prozanski. This has been our January 23rd, 2026 conversation at the City Club of Eugene. City Club is hitting the road, and what you need to know about the Kalapuya is our next forum. We'll hope you'll join us this coming Friday at the Many Nations Longhouse on the UO campus for our January 30th program at noon. It's sure to be a great forum, and we're looking forward to seeing you there. Thank you all. Have a great weekend or week, and see you next time.